Hello, class. It's Miss Roberts here. Hope you guys are having a wonderful week. Tonight, we're going to talk about Chapter 4, Perception. I don't go through all the slides, but I go through some of the key main points that I'll be testing you on and some of the things that will help you out in the assignments for the week. All right, so let's go ahead and begin. Okay. All right, so as always, I have to move myself around a little bit. But let's go on to perceiving others. Okay. So when you think about perception, how would you define that word? Would you define it as how you see the world, how you view a situation, opinions, thoughts? Well, when we talk about the perception process, it's all of those things. And it's really good to know about the perception process when you're dealing with communicating with your interpersonal circles, dealing with conflict, and just understanding someone else's point of view. We're going to talk about the perception process, different theories in perception, and we're also going to talk about errors of perception and some of the pitfalls that we need to avoid in order to be our best communication selves. So think about it like this. What is reality? Now, this isn't your philosophy class, and we're not going to go too deep into it, but if you take a step back, what is reality? Well, there are two steps to figuring out how do we process what is real. One of those being first order realities. What can we observe? So, for example, on my desk, I have this globe. It's really cute from Ross. I can see it. I can touch it. I can spin it. I can place it back on my desk. I can pick it up from my desk. It's a first order reality for me. Me having my globe on my desk. But then there are secondary or second order realities. So, what meaning do we attach to the object? Okay. Like I said before, one of the reasons why I bought this, because it was really cute, but I already had a darker version of the globe. So I'm like, oh, I want to match. And sometimes I think about what places I want to go to one day. And I think about, oh, wow, what is it like for people in societies in different countries? So in this example of me and my globe, that although my first order reality is the actual object, picking it up, putting it down, as I talk about the value I place in the object, that is my second order reality. Like, what does the globe represent in my life or the situation at hand, right? So with second order realities, they don't just reside in objects, but rather in our minds. So first order reality is what you actually observe with your senses, and second order reality is what you attach to that situation. Think about it this way. Two people can experience the exact same thing or be in the exact same situation. So that's the first order reality that they share. But the meaning that they get from that experience can divert or can separate in the second order reality. What are the meanings they get from the situation? So it's a good segue. What influences our perception? So, for example, how do we select? So, how do we gauge, excuse me, how do we gauge which information do we pay attention to? How do we organize that information? So, how do we separate what's important and what's not important in the stimuli we bring in? And once you organize the information or the stimulus, How do we interpret? So, what meaning do we gain from absorbing or taking in this information? And how to negotiate the data. So, do we use it? Do we don't use it? Do we need it? Do we not need it? So, in those steps of perception, what influences that? First off, access to information. So, you might have heard of this term, the information age. And what they're referring to is that with a touch of our hands, with the devices in our pockets, we're able to learn about almost anything. Think about it. Have you ever stopped and instead of just asking another person, what does this mean? Or asking another person about their opinions on something, you've just looked on the internet. I've done it. So, with the access to information at our fingertips and just being so readily accessible, it can influence how fast we perceive things. Can good information disseminate faster? Can bad information disseminate faster? Well, maybe not necessarily bad information, but incorrect information disseminate faster, I should say. Can we post or voice our opinions in an instant? If so, what are the consequences to that? Can we view others' opinions? How does it influence our opinions on situations? So, because we have different levels of access to information and more easier access to information, it can influence your perception about a situation in a more in-depth way. But you have to be careful. You want to make sure that information that you receive quickly is accurate. So there's that access to information either through digital means or through asking someone, reading, other forms of media or communication. Then we have our internal factors that influence how we process information, such as our senses, what we see, what we smell, what we taste, what we touch, what we hear. And if, say, for instance, if you heard information wrong, you have to ask, oh, is this the information that I'm hearing? So you will probably repeat yourself for clarification. Think about optical illusions. The reason that optical illusions work so well is because although we might think that we might be seeing something, our brains influence what we see, but when we look at closer inspection, we might be seeing something else. Our age. So this can have two different effects. So the younger you are, the more attuned or acute in general your senses are versus when you're older. However, when you're older, you might have more experiences with things and be able to interpret things a lot more accurately than when you're younger just because of lack of experience. Then we have health and fatigue. For example, have you ever had to push through and do work while you're sick or while you're sleepy or while you're hungry? That's why when we talk about optimum times to take tests and to study, we want to make sure that your health and fatigue, your health is good and your fatigue is low, just so you can feel your best and do your best in anything that's more physical. Biological cycles such as sleep, hunger, all those things can influence how well we can absorb information. And then there's maybe neurobehavioral challenges. So, for example, certain abilities, certain disabilities, processing disorders, or maybe different emotional states such as depression or anxiety can also be a filter or affect how we perceive the world. Excuse me. All right. So now that we've explored why we perceive certain things, next let's talk about, excuse me, let's talk about different tendencies of perception, different areas of perception. Excuse me. Thank you. All right. So first we have stereotyping. When you hear the word stereotyping, you think of bad stereotypes, errors or perceptions about people. So when you think of stereotypes, it has a very negative connotation. But have you ever take a step back and see and ask yourself, why does a stereotype exist? Why do stereotypes continue, or why do people perpetuate stereotypes even though we know better? So let's talk about it. A stereotype is an exaggerated belief associated with a categorizing system. Okay. So when we think of a categorizing system, we'll talk about how people are stereotyped. Some stereotypes are benign and some are really, really harmful. But how do they form? Step one of how a stereotype forms is that we characterize others on the basis of easily recognizable, but not necessarily significant characteristics. So, for example, we can say that people who drive red cars have a tendency to speed on the road. Okay. So, in that example, people who drive red cars. The red car is an easily recognizable sign that we can identify. Oh, there's a person in a red car. Okay. Ascribing a set of characteristics to most or all members of a group. So people who drive red cars have a tendency to drive fast or speed. So we have the characteristic, the red car, and we attach the drivers, the people, to that characteristic. So if you believe this, the next time you see a person drive a red car, you're like, oh boy, here's a person in a red car. Okay, speed racer. Even though they're probably going the same amount of speed as you are. Another thing about stereotypes is there is the recognizable trait, but it might not have anything to do with the actual characteristic. So just because the color of a car is that color, that doesn't mean that the person driving that color car is more prone or less prone to speeding than anyone else. But because we have this perception of red, fast, sports cars, and we have all these associations, we have that stereotype of person in a red car driving fast, even though the two characteristics, speeding and car color, have nothing to do with each other. You might be able to say, okay, maybe someone who's driving a red sports car could drive faster, possibly because the car might have more power. Or maybe if the person has a tendency of driving fast in the past, more likely they'll speed in the future, right? But by making a snap judgment and stereotyping in that example, you is not necessarily correct because the characteristics don't match or have nothing really to do with each other. However, when you think of stereotypes and we know cognitively, hey, this is wrong to say about someone, think of any stereotype that you heard in the past, even though you know that, hey, you can't put one characteristic for a whole group of people because of society, because of tradition, or because of not knowing, those stereotypes carry on. And one of our first tendencies, or one of the first things that we can do to be more competent communicators, going back to chapter 1, is to see, okay, what stereotypes do we hold about people or hold about groups, and how do I actively dismantle or actively undo some of my thinking so I can remove that stereotype from my thinking, and I can make sure not to treat someone differently or have bad thoughts about a person based on a stereotype or a group membership. So here are some other tendencies of perception that we need to be aware of. So for example, the primacy effect. We pay more attention to the details and recall things that happened first. So say if you're studying for a test and you have, say, 50 vocabulary words to memorize by next week. You have your note cards and you have the definitions and the vocab words, and you're sorting through the cards and you're trying to remember things. We have a tendency to remember maybe the first 10 versus the middle 10, excuse me. So say for instance, you have about 30, so I'll go back to 30. So we have 30 note cards and we're studying our note cards and we're studying our 30 vocab words. We will have a tendency to remember the first 10 because those are the first words that we encountered. The recency effect is the most recent information that you get. That's another effect where we're able to recall the most recent things that we hear. But those middle 10 words, so the first 10, primacy, recency, last 10. So those middle 10 note cards, we might not be able to pay attention to or recall as easily, so we'll have to pay more attention because of the primacy and recency effect. So the things or the information that we have to recall in the middle of that, we might have a tendency to forget. Next, we have the halo effect. So think about what makes a person good, or think about good characteristics in a person. Now, let me ask you this. Is an attractive person good? Think about it for a second. Is an attractive person good? Let's roll that back. Is being attractive good? And if you said yes to that question, if being attractive is good, then if a person is attractive, they're automatically good. Okay. Some of you might pause and say, hey, wait a minute. Okay, attractiveness is a positive trait, but just because a person is attractive, that doesn't mean their overall being is attractive. Well, if someone said yes, like, hey, if a person's attractive, they're good, right? Then that is one example of the halo effect. It's our tendency to form an overall positive impression of someone based on one positive characteristic. You can swipe out attractive for smart, wealthy, good dresser. So think about some of the opinions that you hold of people, right? Just because they're famous and wealthy, they must be automatically good. Or must be automatically be a good person just because of those two good characteristics. Might not necessarily be true, but because we might aspire to be attractive, rich, good dressers, smart, when we encounter that person of who we want to be or has those characteristics that we may want to emulate or that we admire, we tend to say or attribute all these good things to them until they prove otherwise. So with the halo effect, we have an overall positive impression of a person based on just one good characteristic they have, and we don't necessarily look at the whole person. Now there's a converse effect called the horns effect, which is almost akin to a bad first impression. So say if a person has one negative trait or one trait that's associated with being negative, or you met the person and you didn't like them at first, it's a lot harder to get through that first impression and to form a good impression of that person. So that's the opposite. That's the horns effect. But the halo effect is one positive trait. That means the whole person is good. And logically, we know that might not be the case. And finally, we have confirmation bias. We seek out and organize our impressions to support an opinion. So think about election years, right? Election years are pretty intense, especially on the internet. People are voicing their opinions, which is fine. It's great to have discourse and have exposures to different opinions. Even if you don't agree, at least you know what's out there. But with confirmation bias, at least one example of confirmation bias, is think about social media algorithms and YouTube algorithms. For example, my political leanings are more liberal, center liberal, things like that, right? So in some instances I'm more center on the political spectrum, and some instances I'm more on the left or liberal part of the spectrum. And some things I'm more conservative about, just a couple, right? So those are just like my political leanings. And we all have different political leanings about different circumstances. Okay. So I'm an internet user, and I go on YouTube all the time. I go on Facebook all the time, on Instagram all the time, um, and all those other things. But how algorithms work is when you click on certain content, the social media sites will show you content similar to what you've seen before. So as a result, a lot of the content that you might see and that I see on my feed is very similar to what I've clicked before. So here's how confirmation bias plays into the algorithm system, right? So say in a political season, right? Or just for the sake of information seeking, if you're looking towards the internet to find out information, talked about being age information, you have to take the extra step to look for sources that are outside of your own bubble or bubble of opinion or political influence. Because, say, I'm more center or left leaning as far as political views, and I watch videos that reinforce my own political beliefs, then if I just relied on that alone, I wouldn't be able to learn more about the other side or the other view. So, in this political season, I challenged myself to look at more right, not right wing, but right political leanings, right center political leanings that are that's opposite of mine. So, with those programs, I'll be able to learn more about what the other side thinks. I might agree with some, I might disagree with some, but at least I know, first off, what I believe and what I want to vote on. Maybe I might switch a vote or be inspired to look at more information. But by me trying to break my confirmation bias and just trying to seek out opinions that reinforce what I already believe, I want to be more rounded as a voter and be more rounded as far as getting information. So that's pretty much my example of confirmation bias. Think of the algorithm. When you smash that button, when you smash that heart, you're going to get more things on your feed that reinforce what you already believe or what you already know. But challenge yourself to go outside of that, whether you agree or not. See what the other side thinks and sort of try to lean away from confirmation bias. Another tendency we have is we tend to judge ourselves more charitably than someone else. So, for example, say if you're running a bit behind because of traffic, you're like, oh, they should understand. California traffic's crazy. But when you're at the restaurant and you're waiting for someone else, then you're like, hey, what took them so long? So with self-serving bias, we're a little bit more lenient on our tendencies and our flaws, but we judge another person harshly, or more harshly rather, for the same actions. So we're influenced by our own expectations, by the obvious, and we assume that others are like us. So we have a more, or filter of how we expect others to act is based on what we would do. And when they don't do that, because of course they're not us, we might get mad or upset. So if someone thinks differently than you or does something differently than you, then talk about it. But don't expect someone to do something exactly the way you would do it just because we have that self-serving bias filter. So that's something we have to fight as well. Okay. So one of the last things we're going to talk about tonight is perception checking. We just talked about different influences of perception and different errors of perception, and some things we have to think about or try to combat as we become more competent communicators and more competent interpersonal communicators. So, say if I am in a conflict, or say if I am unsure about a situation, right? I use these perception checking technique to not only talk to someone about the situation, but to have another person help me interpret what I'm feeling and not just rely on myself, because as we observed earlier, sometimes our perceptions can be wrong or filtered by our own needs. So in the three parts, if you're trying to figure out, okay, was that the right decision? Am I taking the right stance? Or am I being fair in the situation? Describe the behavior that you noticed, right? So in this step, say if the person experienced the exact same things you have or something similar, they can confirm or not confirm that, hey, this is what happened, or you know where the gray areas are. Then next, consider at least two possible interpretations for the behavior. Sometimes you might get mad because, oh, this person said this or this person did this, and we just sort of jump to conclusions or just sort of go down the rabbit hole of being mad about somebody, right? Go down that rabbit hole. But when you feel the tendency to do that, and I talk to myself as well, step back and see, hey, why did they do that? And figure out at least two possible interpretations for the behavior. So before you jump to conclusions, say, hey, maybe they weren't trying to offend, or maybe they saw things differently, or maybe they did things differently because they're not me, right? And then finally, request clarification about how to interpret the behavior. So you can request clarification from the person that you're talking to. So if, say, for instance, you try to interpret behavior, and if that's not necessarily giving you the answers you need, just ask them, like, hey, what was that about? And they can give you clarification because they did it. Or if it's a situation that's outside or you're not able to contact the person, you can ask someone else, like, hey, I'm describing this behavior. Oh, excuse me. Oh, excuse me. Sorry. Let's go back to that. All right. There we go. So we can so you'll ask the person, hey, describe the behavior that we notice. Hey, these are my interpretations of why they act this way. And then you can get another point of view of how to interpret the behavior. That's really helpful, especially in conflicts. So excuse me about that previous error. Just trying to work these slides over here. All right. So excuse me. So finally, we're going to talk about building empathy, because to be empathetic is to put yourself in the other person's shoes, which is definitely useful in interactions, especially our interpersonal interactions. So how do we do this, right? So when we are empathetic to others and when we demonstrate empathy, we're able to recreate the view from another person's perspective and take on his or her worldview. So it's almost like the opposite of self-serving bias. We're putting ourselves in their shoes, especially when trying to interpret behavior or when we're trying to give support to others. So empathy might take work, and sometimes it's easier to empathize with another person's point of view than others. But definitely challenge yourself too. Um, when you're in a conflict, sometimes it's like, okay, I have to win at all costs, right? But when you're arguing to win, you're not necessarily arguing to understand or to resolve the conflict. So when you're in those spaces or when you're in that place, take a step back and say, okay, I wouldn't do this, but maybe I would do this if I were them. When we are empathetic to others, we are more likely to intervene with when people are in trouble, or we're more likely to help them out. For example, think about GoFundMe, for example. Many people have GoFundMe's for many different reasons. And I have a tendency to do this as well. I only have many funds to give to a GoFundMe, but sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm going to give that GoFundMe. But I see them out. Oh, they have money already. Okay, bye. But as a person who exercises empathy, and if I have the money, I should donate, right? But then we have the bystander effect. So, for example, with the bystander effect, if there's more people around to help, then you have a less tendency to help out because you assume that someone else got this. So you're off the hook. But when you're exercising empathy, you be like, oh, well, you know what? There are other people helping, but let me help too. Or if I was in that person's shoes, I want someone to help me. And then with empathy, if someone offends you or if someone makes you mad, then you can use empathy to put yourself in their shoes. For example, we have to take a step back and say, hey, are we perfect? Do we act correctly all the time? If not, I will want someone to forgive me if I did something against them. So with empathy, opens the door to more forgiveness and to put yourself in another person's shoes. Like, okay, I've been through that before. I've offended before. So let me go ahead, talk it out, and resolve the issue. All right. So let's go ahead. All right. So today we learned about perception. We learned about what perception is, first and second order realities. Here's the globe. But what value do I attribute to my globe? Hopefully, I'll be able to visit the places I want to visit one day. That's another story time for another time. We talked about different areas of perception, why stereotyping is bad and how it forms, halo effect, self-serving bias, confirmation bias, primacy, recency, and how do we check our perceptions and how do we use empathy in order to become better interpersonal communicators. So next time we're going to talk about language. I hope you guys have a wonderful week and I will talk to you guys really soon. Let me know if you have any questions. Alrighty. Bye.